is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
African Union Heads of State Summit kicking off in Addis Ababa. Nigeria front-runner candidates to hold a final weekend campaign rallies. And the US tells Somali National Army to step up the fight against Al-Shabaab. Hello everyone, welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also ahead this hour. In your business news, Egypt's cabinet plans a fund to finance the development of state-owned enterprises. And in sport, South Africa's cricket coach Otis Gibson linked with the England job after the upcoming Cricket World Cup. The African Union's 32nd summit is underway in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Heads of state and governments have started arriving in Addis to deliberate on priority issues ranging from refugees, peace and security, as well as the African Union reform. The summit is expected to pass important decisions to strengthen Africa's development agenda. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
The 2 days Executive Council meeting wrapped with a major emphasis on several issues of the continent. The theme of this 32nd Assembly of the Union deals with refugees, returnees and internally displaced people. It is said the summit must pass stronger decisions before the situation spirals out of control.
The theme of this year is devoted to the issue of refugees, returnees and internally displaced persons. This choice reflects the renewed will of our leaders to find a lasting response to the burning issue of this forced displacement of persons. We have a dual responsibility. But Africa, while continuing to seek the support of the international community, should contribute more significantly to the mobilization of humanitarian assistance.
The figures presented to these foreign ministers showed how alarming the issue of refugees and IDPs has become. Today in Africa, there are 14.7 million internally displaced people and 7.3 million refugees.
In the first 6 months of 2018, only 2 million new people were displaced, mainly from 5 countries: Central African Republic, Nigeria, South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Somalia. Women are often the hardest hit. The female population of refugees is about 57% in 2017. Africa has the second highest burden of displacement, hosting about 37% of the world's 19.6 million refugees.
During the weekend, the African Union Summit at the level of heads of state is expected to also discuss many other agenda items, among which are the issue of AU reform and peace and security in Africa. 2019 marks the 50th anniversary of the 1969 OAU Convention governing the specific aspects of refugee problems in Africa, and the 10th anniversary of the 2009 African Union Convention for the Protection and Assistance of Internally Displaced Persons in the continent. That is the Kampala Convention. Now, after half a century, Africa is yet to achieve full control over its refugee and IDPs related problems. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, let's cross over to Girum Chala in Addis Ababa for some of the very latest updates from the African Union. Girum, some African leaders are already in Addis for the Heads of State Summit. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is also already there. So what more can you tell us in terms of preparations and the agenda for the summit?
Good afternoon, Beatrice, from Addis Ababa, the headquarters of the African Union Commission, where we're going to see the 32nd Assembly of the Union. Already there are presidents and heads of state, also heads of government who have arrived here in Addis Ababa to be part of this summit. And we have heard from the Ethiopian Foreign Ministry and also the African Union source that this time we expect close to 40 heads of state and governments to attend this summit. As you have said earlier, this summit is going to be held under the theme Refugees, Returnees and Internally Displaced Persons. So there is a lot to discuss about apart from the theme, but preparations look so fine so far, and the agenda items are also ready for the leaders to deliberate on.
Well, Girum, so the year's theme dwells on refugees and displaced persons. What are the expected outcomes, though, regarding this? Girum Chala there. Unfortunately, we may have lost that signal to Addis Ababa, but the African Union summit continues until earlier in the week. Well, let's look at other stories we're following for you at this hour and go to Juba, where as the African Union summit deliberates on refugees, peace and security, South Sudan's former rival political and armed groups have just 3 months left to unify their armed forces under the terms of the country's peace deal. The country's President Salva Kiir and his major adversary, the former vice president and rebel leader Riek Machar, signed the agreement in Addis Ababa in September. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet in Juba.
South Sudan's peace deal dictates that the former warring parties need to unify their armed forces before a unity government can be formed. The deadline is now just 3 months away, but there is still a long way to go.
When we finish graduation, when we finish putting them in the cantonment side, they'll be taken to the unified training centers, which is yet to be established. Then from there, they'll be graduated and deployed.
One South Sudanese political analyst says he does have faith in the current peace deal.
There is a political will to implement the agreement. So Dr. Riek will come in May, and other opposition leaders, they will come. So I'm still very optimistic about this peace agreement. There are challenges, if I told you. The challenge of the funding.
The lack of cash is putting the peace deal at risk. The parties to the peace agreement say the lack of funds means the government can't afford to reform its security services properly or repatriate the thousands of people who fled their homes during the conflict. The United Nations mission in South Sudan says 190,000 internally displaced people are still living in its compounds across the country. Many of these people are too afraid to go home in case violence breaks out again. South Sudan's government says it's doing all it can to create lasting peace in the country and close the refugee camps.
I want to encourage them that the government, with our partners, we are serious, that we have to ensure that they go home, but it's voluntary. None of us is forcing them, because the key thing in repatriation, it must be voluntary. We are not forcing nobody, but we will ensure that the security and the areas there where they are going, that they get also some services.
South Sudan's government also says the capital, Juba, is hosting thousands of internally displaced people who are not in the UN compounds. The government says many of these people are ready to return home. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Well, it's exactly a week before Nigerians head to the polls, and the African Union says it wants to avoid any election-related conflicts in the country. The African Union is calling for a peaceful and fair poll and says it is working with Nigerian authorities to achieve this. Former Ethiopian Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn will be heading the African Union's high-level observation mission to Nigeria.
We are going to send observation mission, and which will be led by former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, His Excellency Haile Mariam Desalegn, is the person who is going to lead our mission there. I will be with him, and we will have team and discuss, and I see that others observation mission are there and going to be there. We will accompany Nigeria. Nigeria is a very important country for all Africa. Importance in terms of population, importance in terms of economy, importance in West Africa. In West Africa, we have the headquarters of ECOWAS. We need peaceful, not for Nigeria and for all Africa. We don't need any conflict coming from elections.
Well, things are heating up as the two front-runners, President Muhammadu Buhari and former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, prepare to hold major weekend rallies ahead of the elections. The rallies are scheduled to take place today in two key cities. The commercial hub of Lagos in the southwest is expected to grind to a halt as President Muhammadu Buhari visits. Meanwhile, the main opposition leader Atiku Abubakar will hold a mega rally in the capital, Abuja. Both events are to conclude the campaign trail around Nigeria's 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory before voting begins next Saturday. President Buhari wants a second four-year term, while Abubakar is hoping to finally secure the presidency after 4 previous attempts. Right, for more on this, let's go to Deji Badmus in Lagos and Phil Ihaza in Abuja. To you both, thank you for joining us on Africa Live, and good to see you there, guys. Now, Deji, let's start with you, though, because President Buhari is due to hold a major rally in the commercial hub, Lagos. What's the latest there?
Well, Beatrice, the stadium is getting filled up. I'm actually at the stadium right now in Lagos. It's called the Teslim Balogun Stadium. The whole place is getting filled up. As early as 7 a.m., supporters of the president and, members of his party started trooping to the stadium here. The rally is yet to begin, but I can tell you that the place is getting jammed. We expect that in the coming hours, the president will come in, and of course, senior members of the party would also come in to address the crowd. But this is a massive rally. The APC before now said this was going to be the mother of all rallies, and somehow I think it is living up to that billing, especially if you look at the number of people still coming in. The main bowl of the stadium is filled up, but then you still have so many people outside trying to get in. So it's no doubt a massive rally, and it's one rally that the APC, I'm talking about the ruling party now, would want to use this to make a very strong statement. Beatrice?
And Phil in Abuja, Atiku Abubakar was supposed to hold a rally in Abuja, but so far not much activity there. Why? Well, unfortunately, Phil will return to you in a moment. But Deji, if Lagos is home to over 21 million residents, what will the Buhari team be telling voters there? What will be dominating his agenda in Lagos?
Well, basically, it would be about his achievement. I mean, that's what he's been talking about. That in 2015, he basically promised 3 things. That he was going to secure this country, and that he was going to turn around the economy of the country, as well as fight corruption. Now, some people would tell you that on the economic front, he may not have done so very much, but in terms of security, the government has been able to push back Boko Haram. And in terms of the fight against corruption, I mean, you give it to this government. It's done very well in that regard. Of course, the opposition continues to maintain that the fight is selective, but then the government says, look, all of those who have been accused and tried are actually have questions to answer. And I think that's what the president would be telling the people here, unfolding his achievement and then letting them know that, look, he needs additional 4 years to be able to complete some of the projects that he's got going. For instance, yesterday they flagged off the standard gauge rail line from Lagos to Abeokuta. That rail line is expected to go as far as Ibadan and, of course, the north of the country. So you would expect that, sorry about that. So you would expect that the president would, highlight all of this and try to get the people to steer the course. And don't forget also that this state is actually governed by the All Progressives Congress. So, and it's one of the most important states for the APC. It's one state that it hopes and intends to win big, because somehow a lot of people have said, whatever happens here, how big the president wins here may determine whether he wins the entire elections.
So Deji is still with you, staying with you on the line there for a minute longer, because You've mentioned that corruption has made some headway, over the last 4 years. Security as well has been a key factor in, especially in the last election. But ethnicity and religion also played a key role in the last elections. What are the key issues around this time?
Now, Beatrice, one thing I can tell you is that religion may not play a key role in this election because both major candidates are actually Muslims, and then they are from the north. So to some extent, ethnicity too may not play. But ethnicity will still play a role because, we're looking at their running mates now. Deliberately, the two major candidates have chosen their running mates now from two different parts of the country. I mean, Atiku, for instance, his running mate is from the northeast of the country, and then President Buhari's running mate is from the southwest of the country. And Lagos, of course, as you know, is the southwest of the country. So the calculation is that where ethnicity may play a role is that, the calculation is that majority of the people in the southwest, I'm talking about the Yoruba-speaking people now, may vote for the President Buhari because his running mate is from the southwest. In the southeast, it is expected to follow the same pattern. The majority of the people in the southeast are expected to vote Atiku. I'm talking about the PDP because the running mate of Atiku, of course, is from the southeast, Igbo speaking. Now, but other than that, there are some other key factors too. Sentiments would count. How much the economy would count, we'll just have to wait and see. Among the elites, there's no question that the economy will count. But I can tell you, Beatrice, that to some extent, ethnicity will still play a role in this election because of the running mates of the two major candidates. All right,
Deji Badmus for us there in Abuja, in Lagos, I beg your pardon. Thank you very much for that. Well, let's now go to other stories of the day here. And the outgoing head of the U.S. Africa Command says American military force alone will not be enough to defeat Al-Shabaab in Somalia. General Thomas Vothhauser says the Somali National Army needs to step up. From Washington, D.C., Daniel Renches reports.
Since April of 2017, which was early in the tenure of President Donald Trump, the U.S. military was given far greater authority to take military action to strike Al-Shabaab from the air and to assist Somali and African Union forces on the ground. In his final testimony to the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee before leaving his job as commander of AFRICOM, General Thomas Waldhauser detailed 47 strikes in 2018 and 12 so far in 2019. He told Senate lawmakers that he'd repeatedly delivered this message to Somali President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo and Prime Minister Hassan Ali Khaire.
At the end of the day, these strikes are not going to defeat al-Shabaab, but they're going to provide the opportunity for the federal government and the Somali National Army to grow and assume the security of that country. The strikes won't defeat. We know that they are causing problems. We know that they are deterring. It's an open question as to how much, but we know it's causing al-Shabaab problems, giving this opportunity for the government. But the bottom line is that the Somali National Army needs to grow, it needs to step up, and it needs to take responsibility for their own security.
General Waldhauser also made it clear that the U.S. military effort is only one of the pieces of the puzzle. He endorsed efforts by the international community, including the U.S. Agency for International Development, to promote Somali economic, social and political governance. Those elements, he said, were crucial parts of the Somali transition strategy designed to address the drivers of the conflict. Daniel Renches, CGTN, Washington.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. 7 jihadists get life sentences for the deadly 2015 Tunisia attacks. And in international news, U.S. President confirms meeting with the DPRK leader will be held in the Vietnamese capital, Hanoi, later in the month.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
A Tunisian court has sentenced 7 jihadists to life in prison over attacks at a museum and on a beach in 2015 that killed 60 people, many of them tourists. The prosecution spokesman, Sofiane Sliti, said 3 were given life sentences for homicide over the first attack in March 2015 at the capital's Bardo Museum, in which 2 gunmen killed 21 foreign tourists and a Tunisian security guard. 4 received the same term for the shooting rampage at a Sousse tourist resort in June that year, which killed 38 people, mostly British tourists. Dozens of defendants faced 2 separate trials over the closely linked shootings, which occurred just months apart in Tunis and Sousse. Several defendants pointed to the fugitive Chamseddine Sandi as the mastermind of both. A relationship that looked to be on the mend is showing signs of fraying again. The European Union and Zimbabwe ties are under the spotlight again as the EU foreign ministers prepare to meet to discuss a response to the situation in Zimbabwe following recent protests and a violence crackdown by security forces. CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya looks at the state of relations between Harare and Brussels.
Apart from Zimbabwe's open for business, the other constant since Emmerson Mnangagwa took over has been the need to normalize relations with the West. Things were headed that way for a while, but scathing condemnation of a heavy-handed response to anti-government protests in January may have changed course and threatens a return to a bitter standoff.
They were looking for the slightest opportunity for any mishap to happen in the country to reconfirm and re-establish sanctions. The EU foreign policy on Zimbabwe has not changed in the last 20 years. They were simply waiting for an opportunity to emphasize what they've been saying. We are still paying for the land reform. That is very clear.
But some believe even before the recent unrest, President Mnangagwa's government spurned an opportunity by failing to implement promised reforms.
The international community, particularly the UK, which was starting to cozy up to the Harare government, Harare regime, the Harare administration, is very disappointed. Because of, now they are now saying that there is more rhetoric than action.
The situation can still be salvaged.
We need genuine dialogue. We need to agree on the set of reforms that we as a nation are going to push forward. And that way we will be able to then convince the international community we have found each other as Zimbabweans and we are working together for the good of our country.
Talks between political rivals are underway amidst exhortations to put national interests first.
We should not lose focus. Let us focus on re-engaging as far as we can, but not tether Zimbabwe's development to validation by the British Parliament or by the European Union.
Something Mnangagwa has been quick to impress upon his counterparts.
Outsiders can only come in to assist us, but the prime responsibility for our country's development remains our own responsibility.
With more inter-party talks to chart a way forward on the cards, it could be said Zimbabwe is at a crossroads. The coming months will determine just which way it goes. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
To the latest now on the newly signed peace deal in the Central African Republic. The pact signed between the government and 14 rebel groups is calling for a truth commission within 90 days. The parties to the deal are also said to have committed to the setting up of joint security patrols with soldiers and members of the armed groups for a period of 24 months.
Details of the peace deal have not yet been publicly released. They are being kept under wraps until the last 3 parties to the accord sign it. Reports indicate that the accord spells out important confidence-building measures and calls for setting up Truth and Reconciliation Commission, one of the most important provisions. Parties to the deal are also said to have committed to setting up joint security patrols with soldiers and members of the armed groups for 2 years. The accord is the 8th attempt in nearly 6 years to try and forge peace in the country.
En veillant au respect de la volonté populaire.
In ensuring respect for the people's will, I pledge to fully support the process of dialogue to achieve a just and lasting peace among the constituents of the Central African people.
Both the African Union and the United Nations have commended both parties for their commitment and willingness to compromise.
It is to reaffirm the independence, the sovereignty of CAR, but also to call to witness the sovereign people of the CAR that we wanted this agreement to be signed here in Bangui and that the signatory parties appropriate it as it should be.
You have lived divided from the four horizons of your beautiful and great country, the Central African Republic, but you have undoubtedly returned to Bangui as a single people, stronger and determined together to meet the challenges of a common destiny. This is the hope that we nurture.
The accord was initiated in the Sudanese capital Khartoum on Tuesday before being signed in the capital Bangui on Wednesday by some militia leaders and President Faustin Archange Touadera. The 3 other signatories are expected to sign the deal during the upcoming Africa Union Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Sadiq Shaban, CGTN.
In Burkina Faso, the People's Republic of China has offered 6 pickup trucks to the Burkinabe Ministry of Security. The support from China comes at a time when Burkina Faso has been facing recurrent terrorist attacks in its Sahelian and eastern regions. This donation marks the strengthening of a strong bilateral Sino-Burkinabe cooperation. Meanwhile, the Burkinabe Minister of Security has expressed gratitude to the Chinese government.
This gesture is part of an increasingly strong cooperation between the governments of Burkina Faso and China. Hopes are high that this cooperation will go forward and intensify. The Burkinabe people, through their security forces, will immediately and effectively use these vehicles in the fight against terrorism.
À travers ces forces de sécurité,
on a bien décidé
We decided to provide these vehicles in order to somewhat increase mobility in the daily reactions in the city's patrol. I believe that we still share the same values in the fight against extremism. This is why cooperation in the field of security will continue, not only between the 2 ministries, but also at the national level, even within the framework of the G5 Sahel.
And we're learning more details about the summit between the leaders of the DPRK and the United States. U.S. President Donald Trump confirms it will be held in the Vietnamese capital Hanoi on February the 27th and the 28th. This will be his second time in the past year to sit down with the DPRK leader Kim Jong-un. Trump said he's looking forward to the opportunity to advance the cause of peace. Well, Trump's negotiator just wrapped up a trip to the DPRK where he says he had productive talks. On Saturday, Stephen Biegun briefed South Korean leaders in Seoul on the visit. The U.S. envoy spent 3 days in Pyongyang discussing the second summit between Trump and Kim. They agreed to meet again in the coming weeks and promised to transform relations.
I had a chance to speak to the Secretary of State last night and give him a readout of the discussions, and I would say that we had a productive set of discussions over the last few days. Our team engaged on a number of areas of mutual interest, and we've agreed to meet again. So I think this is a constructive place for us to be, especially in advance of the President's second summit with Chairman Kim that will happen now at the end of the month.
And now to our continuing series on treasures of Turkana. The Loyangalani Desert Museum in Kenya's north is the only one of its kind in East Africa. It aims to preserve the cultures and traditions of the local communities by preserving their most important artifacts.
It is built in a semicircle
in the fashion of a local traditional homestead. This is the Loyangalani Desert Museum, a treasure trove tucked away in the Marsabit Desert, overlooking the Jade Sea, or Lake Turkana as it's popularly known. Loyangalani means a place of many trees in the local Samburu language. The museum houses a variety of items showing off the cultures and the traditions of the communities that live in Loyangalani.
It houses the history of 6 communities. Every important cultural item is kept here in the museum.
The communities whose cultures are showcased here include the El Molo, the Rendile, Samburu, Turkana, Dasanach, and the Somali people. The items range from wooden and metallic tools to weapons and furniture, traditional garments, livestock management items like the old wooden bells traditionally hung on the livestock, and photographs of the communities that have long lived side by side in this region. They tell stories that the people want to remember. The National Museums of Kenya refurbished the structure and opened it in 2014. Located about 700 kilometers from the capital, Nairobi, the museum is unlike any other in the region.
International and local tourists come to see what we have here. They pay a fee to enter and the money helps the museum.
Visitors can stay in self-contained cottages in the museum, taking in the rich cultural traditions nurtured by interactions among the different ethnic groups, while local businesses benefit from the arrival of tourists. And as long as the museum remains, locals find comfort in the thought that their stories will live on long after they are gone. The items in this museum are a tribute to the past, with locals determined to remember their history and how they adapted in order to survive. Wilkisa Nyabo, CGTN in Loyangalani, Kenya.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. Egypt's cabinet plans a fund to finance the development of state-owned enterprises. And South Africa's retail sector faces heavy strain amidst the weakening economy.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Kenya's smallest mobile operator, Telkom Kenya, and India's Bharti Airtel unit, Airtel Networks Kenya, are set to merge into one unit. The agreement will see them combine their respective mobile, enterprise and carrier service businesses in Kenya. The proposed deal will operate under a joint venture company to be named Airtel Telkom. But Telkom Kenya's real estate portfolio and specific government services will not form part of the combined entity. However, it will still have the option to hold up to 49% of that shareholding. The combined entity is expected to be chaired by Telkom CEO Mugo Kibati, while Airtel's Prasanta Sarma is set to be appointed as the CEO. The Central Bank of Rwanda has announced that the redesigned banknotes of 500 and 1,000 Rwandan francs are expected to go into circulation next week. This follows last month's presidential order which confirmed the new banknotes as legal tender. The notes have improved security features as well as better quality to reduce wearing out. Across the world, governments have been investing in improving security features of their legal tender as counterfeiters improve on their techniques. The rollout is expected to cost the Rwandan government about $6 million. Rwanda is to introduce the new banknotes. In Egypt, the cabinet will set up a fund to finance the development of state-owned enterprises. It plans to sell shares in dozens of state-owned enterprises over the next few years to help boost public finances. The government plans to sell stakes in 3 banks, a cigarette maker, an oil services company and a fertilizer maker, among others. The move is part of a broader state of economic reforms tied to a $12 billion IMF loan Cairo received in the late 2016. The fund will be managed by a committee headed by the Public Enterprises Minister. It would include members from the State Council, the Finance Ministry, the National Investment Bank and the chairman of any holding company that the fund develops. The Bank of Uganda has held the central bank rate at 10%, citing a low inflation environment. Policymakers say the decision to maintain the central bank rate at a historical low is keeping Uganda's economic growth on a steady path. CGTN's Michael Baleke has that report.
The central bank rate was first set in October 2018 and maintained last December. And the Monetary Policy Committee reasons that holding the rate at such record lows is expected to stimulate Uganda's growth.
The economy is projected to grow by about 6.3% in fiscal 2018-2019 and remain on a steady growth trajectory over the coming years, with output trending above potential.
The projected growth, according to the central bank, will be driven by favorable financial conditions, investments in public infrastructure, resulting into strong domestic demand and improved agricultural performance. All these will be supported by the continued decline in international oil prices and a stable exchange rate.
We now have an agricultural credit facility where there is a risk sharing between the banks and the government, and that has been supportive of lending to the agricultural sector, and it has remained quite strong.
However, the central bank says weather-related constraints to agriculture and delays in implementation of public infrastructure are risks to the projected growth. The rising trade protectionist agenda around the world could come with painful consequences to some African countries like Uganda. But Bank of Uganda is confident that the damage from the new international trade barriers would not be enough to dent this year's growth forecast. Uganda's export market largely depends on her neighbors.
2018 as a calendar year, we saw export to Kenya around $719 million of exports. In DRC, we saw around 400 and in the range of 450, and then South Sudan around 405. So the 3 main countries in the rank were those countries.
The Bank of Uganda forecasts that inflation will stay within its policy target, driven by a stronger shilling and improved crop harvests after recent moderate rains. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
On to Zimbabwe now, and gold miner Ryozim says it has suspended production in 3 mines for the second time in 4 months due to a shortage of US dollars. Gold producers sell their output to the reserve banks, a subsidiary Fidelity Printers and refiners, and are entitled to 55% of their earnings in US dollars. Last October, the company threatened legal action to force the Reserve Bank to pay it more dollars for part of its output. It said it continues to engage the Reserve Bank, but if negotiations fail, it will shut its mines indefinitely. Zimbabwe adopted the US dollar in 2009 to tame hyperinflation, but is facing acute dollar shortages. Gold is the country's single largest export earner, and production reached an all-time high of 33 tons in 2018 from 27 tons the year before. South African apparel giant Edcon says it's close to finalizing a deal to restructure its mammoth $230 million debt burden. It has been in the market for almost a century, making it the oldest and largest fashion retailer in the country. But the group is in financial trouble and has been looking to investors to recapitalize its balance sheet. Sumitra Naidu reports.
Edcon, famously known as Edgar's, has been a part of the South African fashion scene for decades. The retailer turns 90 this year, but there might be little to celebrate if it has to close its doors. In December 2018, Edcon announced that it could no longer maintain its $230 million worth of debt. In the last year, it's been forced to close over 100 stores, with more expected to go in 2019.
There's no question we're consolidating. Sure, that ends up with some stores being closed, but we've made commitments to move the store sales staff from stores that are being closed to the surrounding stores. We're starting with the small ones. That was never really made much sense for Edcon to have all these small stores.
The Edcon Group is trying its last efforts to keep the company operational. It runs on a big departmental store model, similar to that of Stutterford's, which went bust in 2017 after 159 years, owing to a slower consumer economy and changing spending patterns.
So I don't think the model is dead. I think what is true is certainly customers appreciate a convenience shop, in a smaller store, and so that's fine. That's not our market. And so what we have to do is have less of these very large stores, but I still think there's a role for them.
Edcon employs close to 140,000 people in over 200 retail stores across the country. It's still negotiating with landlords for lower rentals and is also reducing store space in some shopping malls.
The previous years of Edcon have been stuck in an expansion strategy: more stores, more staff, more stock, more brands. I have been tasked with less stores, less staff, less brands. The time of just opening up more stores and making more profits is over. This has happened everywhere else and around the world, and it's time for us to roll our sleeves and do the hard work.
Edcon is hoping to finalize a recapitalization deal soon to keep it afloat until it returns to profitability, but it needs over $200 million. It's currently in talks with the Public Investment Corporation. It's tricky times though, because the PIC is dealing with its own troubles at this time. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Nigerian musicians sing for election. That coming up.
When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Do you see fast-growing, endless deserts and parched earth? Or do you see the biggest opportunity for an agricultural revolution in a generation? Do you see crowded, unplanned cities or vast, untapped markets? Do you see a population at risk? Or do you see a billion-strong opportunity to grow the next wave of multi-billion-dollar firms in Africa? When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Youth in Nigeria are adding their voice to the ongoing election debate in a different way. Some 10 young musicians have been experimenting with lyrics and vocal arrangements in songs about good governance, inclusive dialogue and political representation.
In order to promote youthful conversations around Nigeria's election, Accountability Lab Nigeria has embarked on a competition dubbed Voice to Rep. The project aims to mentor upcoming musicians to distribute socially conscious music.
We've gone through a lot of trainings, they've made us see a lot of things, and I see the difference. I see that it's important to actually always speak out. It's even whatever tool you have, and for me it's music, and I feel like after leaving this place, it's going to be a great difference because the songs that I put out will be more conscious.
A lot of people have spoken about participation, about governance, about different things.
And there's no better time to talk about it than now. You know, it's been 4 years since our last election, and a lot of things may have, you know, been forgotten. It's easier to remember something that is, you know, that happens closest to, you know, the election period.
Music has played an important role in Nigerian elections, with influential artists supporting candidates through public endorsements and campaign anthem compositions.
In the past, I have supported one or two candidates that I knew personally and I felt were fit for office. But right now, I think that the greater conversation is about, you know, what young people need to see in terms of competence in office, and that's the lane I'm in right now.
Despite having no prize money attached to it, the Voice to Rep competition is a platform for young musicians to focus on Nigeria's social development agenda.
We have young people who are making socially conscious music for good governance, for elections, for women's participation in governance, and also for the private sector integrity as well. So we engage these people to make music and train them, mentor them, give them the platform to reach out to Nigerians, speak to Nigerians, engage Nigerians, and inform Nigerians as well to ask questions and hold government accountable.
Nigerian youths are hopeful that the upcoming polls will give way for leaders who will address their unemployment challenges. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
A special exhibition about Nelson Mandela's life and legacy has opened in London. The interactive exhibition takes a journey through Mandela's life, including his upbringing in rural Eastern Cape as the son of a chief. It also features previously unseen footage alongside more than 150 artifacts. Let's take a look.
Madiba's items such as clothes, campaign posters and travel documents have been loaned to the exhibition. The family of the Nobel Peace Prize winner wants everyone to be able to commemorate his life as a freedom fighter. His grandson Mandela Mandela hopes the exhibition will inspire a sense of action and accountability in the younger generations.
My grandfather, during his presidential years, he wore a watch, a Philip Patek watch. And I've made that watch available because he gave me that watch, and I think he was such a committed person and always on time and always held up time, and he was never late for any commitment. Even when he traveled abroad, his watch remained on South African time, which we found hilarious as a family. But that watch is also here on display. Madiba may no longer be with us, but the fight continues. We need to champion the work that he represented. He was a global icon for justice, peace, and fought for human rights. And we need to take the stand to speak out.
London is the first city to host the touring show before it is permanently mounted in Mandela's birthplace, Mvezo. Both locals and tourists here hope to learn a thing or two from South Africa's former president's life journey.
It is critical for us to remember this person, to learn from his lessons, to learn from his legacy. It's our generation's responsibility to ensure that we record history for generations to come, to understand the character and to understand the glorious human achievement of Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela was an iconic freedom fighter, and even though he passed on a few years ago, his family hopes that his memory will remain fresh in many people's minds by holding such exhibitions. For CGTN, I am Wilkis Tanyabwa.
And coming up in your sports news, South Africa's cricket coach Otis Gibson linked with the England job after the upcoming Cricket World Cup.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
And we begin with cricket news. A newspaper report during the South African series against Pakistan claimed that the Proteas head coach Otis Gibson looks set to replace the beleaguered England coach Trevor Bayliss after the World Cup. Gibson has refused to comment on the matter, but the reality is that he could well be lost to South African cricket in just a few months' time. Here's CGTN CS Duplessis with more.
There's no doubt that the West Indian has had a huge impact on South African cricket. His relationship with the players has been positive, and he has breathed new life into a talented group of players. But the Protea coach could be on his way out if he fails to meet a key mandate in his agreement with Cricket South Africa.
His contract was set up in a way that he has to win the World Cup for South Africa, and then they'll think about extensions or no extensions. So for him, I think it's still business as usual, and they'll probably think about what happens to his future after the World Cup.
Gibson's approach to the national team has been refreshing and has allowed many players to flourish on the international stage.
He's brought in a whole new culture of giving guys chances, testing out new plans, playing aggressive cricket. Sometimes it didn't come off all that well all the time, but I think him and Faf also, they found great partners in each other. And I think with a partnership of Otis and Faf, South African cricket can go from strength to strength.
The plan has always been to experiment ahead of the World Cup, and the upcoming series against Sri Lanka will be the last opportunity for the former England bowling coach to mix and match.
Unfortunately, he had a couple of guys out injured. JP Dumini, Lungingidi wasn't available for him. So I think in the Sri Lanka series, we'll get to see what is close to the makeup of the World Cup squad.
South Africa have never won the biggest prize in world cricket, and although the Proteas have been a dominant force since the last World Cup, they go into the tournament as dark horses instead of title contenders.
Cautiously, we can be excited. I don't think the Proteas are by a long shot the favourites for the tournament. I think India and England will be the favourites, and rightly so. But I think the Proteas should be able to make a semi-final spot. So I think if the batsmen can pull through, we do have the bowlers to do damage early on in the innings, and then the Proteas might just surprise. But I don't think they're the favourites at the moment.
Gibson can't be blamed for putting out feelers, as winning the World Cup is a tall order, even for a talented group like South Africa. Either way, Gibson sits in a win-win situation, because if he wins the World Cup, he keeps his job and becomes a South African hero. But if he doesn't, he could still waltz straight into the Australians' job at the ECB in September. CS Duplessis, CGTN, Johannesburg.
To football news now, and Flamengo's president Rodolfo Landmin says the deadly fire that tore through the Brazilian football club's training complex is the worst tragedy in the club's 123-year-old history. Landmin says the club was working with authorities to investigate the cause of the fire. Firefighters were called in early morning to battle a blaze at the sprawling Ninho de Urubu training ground of the Flamengo club in Rio's western region. The blaze left 10 dead and 3 injured.
Flamengo também está colaborando com as autoridades.
Flamengo is collaborating with authorities to identify the cause of the fire. Nobody is more interested in this than us. And finally, to add that all of us here in the club are mourning. It's a huge sadness we are feeling.
In Spanish football, Real Madrid coach Santiago Solari says he respects Atletico Madrid's coach Diego Simeone ahead of the Madrid derby on Saturday to be played at the Wanda Metropolitano. Real trained on Friday, looking forward to facing Atletico in a battle between the second place and third place. Los Blancos, who drew 1-1 against FC Barcelona on Wednesday in the first leg of their Copa del Rey semi-final, are trailing Atletico by 2 points in the standings. The host team are so far unbeaten at home in La Liga with 9 wins and 2 draws, and they have conceded just 14 goals all season. But the 33-time Spanish La Liga champs, who started their season badly, will be eyeing maximum points in order to move up to second.
They are a very intense and tactical team. They are also very robust. In order to thwart them, we will need to play with intensity and strength. We will need to play our football from the very beginning of the match.
In French football, PSG coach Thomas Tuchel must decide whether to risk playing key midfielder Marco Verratti at home to Bordeaux on Saturday. Verratti resumed training this week after recovering from a sprained ankle. Tuchel needs Verratti at Manchester United in the last 16 of the Champions League on Tuesday. It is a headache for Tuchel, who may rule out Verratti and move either Marquinhos, Julian Draxler or Dani Alves out of their normal positions into a makeshift midfield alongside new signing Leandro Paredes. Considering they have a 10-point lead at the top of France's Ligue 1 with 2 games in hand on second-place Lille, PSG can afford to experiment against Bordeaux.
Bordeaux are a team with many qualities. They are a team with fast and aggressive attackers. They often recover the ball in the opponent's half. They do a very high pressing, so we will try to find solutions, but it's not easy. The challenge is that we must stay focused on this game, to play seriously because this match is important now.
To rugby news now, and Wales are trying to equal their all-time unbeaten record of 11 successive wins on Saturday, last achieved between 1907 and 1910. Coach Warren Gatland has made 10 changes from the side that came from 16-0 down at half-time to overcome France 24-19 in Paris. Gatland hands Six Nations debuts to winger John Paris has warned his side are sick and tired of losing and are determined to end their 18-match Six Nations losing streak against Wales in the Stadio Olympio.
Yeah, look, I think we pay Italy huge respect. You know, they're always a tough team, tough opponent, but we have to make sure that, like I said, we bring in our structures, the way our play, and you know, use that as a positive to make sure that we gain confidence and you know, put our mark on the game. You know, make sure that we get the right result we want.
To tennis now, and Roger Federer and Bjorn Borg helped to launch the 3rd edition of the Laver Cup on Friday, which will see Team Europe take on Team World in Geneva, Switzerland in September. The tournament sees the cream of European talent take on their counterparts from the rest of the world, with Borg and John McEnroe, the respective captains. Team Europe are currently unbeaten in Laver